There are moments in life that arrive so quietly, so unexpectedly, that you don't recognize them as turning points until they've already changed everything. Moments when the air shifts, when time seems to slow, and when you realize that the person you thought you were no longer exists. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening in late autumn, during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 58 years old, a woman who has lived through seasons of joy and sorrow, triumph and heartbreak. I raised my daughter, Claire, on my own after my husband passed away when she was just 7 years old. Those years were not easy. There were nights when I worked 2 jobs, mornings when exhaustion felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. But I never let Claire see me break. I wanted her to grow up knowing that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every single time you do. Claire grew into a beautiful young woman, not just in appearance but in spirit. She had her father's kindness, his gentle laugh that could fill a room with warmth. She became a teacher, pouring her heart into shaping young minds, and I watched with pride as she built a life I had always dreamed she would have. When she met Daniel 3 years ago, I wanted so desperately to believe he was the right man for her. Daniel came from a prominent family in our city. His father owned a chain of successful car dealerships, and his mother, Patricia, carried herself with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. From the very first time I met them, something in my chest tightened with unease. But Claire was radiant with happiness, her eyes sparkling whenever she spoke his name, and I told myself I was being overprotective. I told myself that my instincts were wrong. They married in a spring ceremony filled with white roses and golden sunlight. Claire wore my mother's veil, and as I watched her walk down the aisle, tears streamed down my face, tears of joy mixed with an inexplicable sadness I couldn't name. Within a year, they had a daughter, sweet little Emma, who became the light of my life. Every weekend I would visit them, bringing homemade cookies and stories, watching Emma's face light up with wonder. But over the past 6 months, something had changed. Claire's laughter came less frequently. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a guardedness I recognized too well. She wore long sleeves even in summer heat. She made excuses for Bruce's clumsy accidents, she said, laughing them off with a brittleness that broke my heart. I asked her more than once if everything was all right. Each time she assured me it was, but her smile never reached her eyes. And then came that Tuesday evening. The invitation had come from Patricia herself, delivered through a text message that felt more like a summons than a request. Family dinner at our home, 7 o'clock, don't be late. No warmth, no personal touch, just an expectation of compliance. I almost declined, but Claire called me that afternoon, her voice small and hopeful. "Please come, Mom," she whispered. "I need you there." Those words settled in my stomach like stones. I need you there, not I want you there, or it would be nice if you came. I need you. Something was wrong, and every maternal instinct I possessed was screaming at me to pay attention. I arrived at Patricia and Edward's house at exactly 7 o'clock. Their home was impressive in the way that money can make things impressive large, immaculately decorated, filled with expensive furniture that looked beautiful but felt cold. Patricia answered the door wearing a designer dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret," she said, my name sounding like an obligation on her tongue. "Do come in." The dining room table was set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light from an enormous chandelier. Edward sat at the head of the table, already nursing a glass of whiskey, barely acknowledging my arrival with a grunt. Daniel stood near the window, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. And there was Claire, my beautiful daughter, setting down a serving dish with trembling hands. She looked thin, too thin, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. When she saw me, relief flooded her face for just a moment before fear replaced it. Fear, my daughter was afraid, and that realization sent ice through my veins. "Where's Emma?" I asked, keeping my voice light even as my heart hammered in my chest. "Upstairs with the nanny," Claire replied quietly. "We thought it would be better if she ate earlier." Patricia made a dismissive sound. Children belong in their own space during adult conversations, she declared, taking her seat at the table. "Now shall we begin?" Dinner started with strained small talk. Patricia dominated the conversation, speaking about their social circle, about charity events and country club gossip, her words dripping with thinly veiled condescension whenever she addressed Claire. "Of course, Claire, you wouldn't understand the complexities of organizing such events. It requires a certain sophistication." I watched Daniel, waiting for him to defend his wife, to show even a shred of respect for the woman he had vowed to love and cherish. Instead, he remained silent, his expression dark, his fingers wrapped too tightly around his wine glass. Claire served the main course with quiet efficiency, moving around the table like a ghost. When she placed a plate in front of Daniel, her hand shook slightly, and a drop of sauce landed on the pristine white tablecloth. It was such a small thing, insignificant really, but the reaction it triggered was anything but small. Daniel's hand slammed down on the table with such force that the glasses jumped, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Can't you do anything right?" he snarled, his voice low and venomous. Claire froze, her face draining of color. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll clean it, sorry." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're always sorry, Claire. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you're completely incompetent." My whole body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready. But before I could speak, before I could move, Patricia's voice cut through the air, sharp and approving. "Daniel's right, dear. You really should be more careful. A wife's job is to make things pleasant, not to create more work for everyone." The words hung in the air like poison. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, her jaw trembling with the effort of holding herself together. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into my arms and carry her away from this nightmare. But something told me to wait, to watch. And then it happened. Daniel moved so fast that I almost didn't process what I was seeing. His hand flew through the air and connected with Claire's face with a crack that seemed to split the world in half. Her head snapped to the side, and she stumbled backward, catching herself on the edge of the table. Time slowed. I watched in horrified disbelief as he struck her again, and then again, 3 times in rapid succession, each blow delivered with casual brutality, as if she were nothing more than an object in his way. The final shove sent her crashing to the floor, where she landed hard, her hands instinctively protecting her face. And then I heard it, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Patricia was clapping. Slowly, deliberately, she was applauding her son, a smile of satisfaction on her perfectly made-up face. "That's how she learns," she said, her voice filled with approval. "Discipline, Daniel, firm discipline. It's the only way to handle women who don't know their place." Edward didn't even look up from his plate. My blood didn't just run cold. It turned to ice in my veins. Every sound in the room seemed to fade except for the pounding of my heart in my ears. I looked at my daughter, crumpled on the floor, and then at the monsters sitting at this table, and something inside me crystallized into absolute clarity. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what I had survived, what I had built, what I was capable of. To them, I was just Margaret, the middle-class widow, the insignificant mother, and law they could dismiss and ignore. They had looked at me and seen nothing worth respecting. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. No one paid attention to me at first. Patricia was still lecturing Claire about obedience and respect. Daniel was straightening his shirt, his breathing heavy, his eyes cold. Edward had poured himself another drink. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. My mind was crystal clear. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, and I pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered. "Maggie, is everything all right?" "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I need you at 1247 Oakwood Drive immediately, and Marcus, bring everyone." There was a pause, just a heartbeat of silence, and then, on my way. I ended the call and placed my phone carefully on the table. Only then did the others notice that something had shifted in the atmosphere. Patricia looked at me with irritation. "Margaret, we're in the middle of be quiet," I said softly. The command in those two words made her mouth snap shut. Daniel turned to face me fully, confusion and anger warring on his face. "What do you think you're? Sit down and don't speak." I interrupted, my voice still calm, still quiet, but carrying a weight that made him hesitate. I walked over to Claire and knelt beside her, gently helping her to her feet. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, a red mark already blooming on her cheek. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, brushing her hair back from her face. "You have nothing to be sorry for, nothing. Do you understand me?" She nodded, but I could see the shame and fear still clouding her eyes. Years of psychological abuse had convinced her that she somehow deserved this treatment, that she was the problem. My heart broke and hardened simultaneously. I guided Claire to a chair away from the table, and then turned back to face the three people who had created this nightmare. They were staring at me now with varying expressions, Patricia with indignation, Daniel with brewing anger, Edward with barely concealed contempt. "Who do you think you are?" Patricia finally managed, her voice shrill. "You come into our home, and your home," I repeated, and something in my tone made her stop. "Let me tell you something about homes, Patricia. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of safety and love. What you've created here isn't a home, it's a prison." Daniel took a step toward me, his fists clenched. "You need to leave now, before you what?" I asked, meeting his eyes with a gaze that made him stop in his tracks. "Before you hit me the way you hit your wife, the mother of your child. Do you want to try that, Daniel? Please, I'm giving you permission to try." He wavered. something in his lizard brain recognizing danger, even if his conscious mind couldn't identify it yet. "I didn't think so," I said quietly. "You see, men like you are only brave when you're hitting someone who can't fight back, someone who's been systematically broken down until they believe they deserve the abuse. But I haven't been broken, Daniel, and you're about to discover exactly what that means." The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Patricia moved to answer it, but I held up one hand. "I'll get it," I said, and something in my voice made her sink back into her chair. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there, looking exactly as he always did, composed, professional, and utterly competent. Behind him stood 4 other people, all wearing expressions of quiet authority. Marcus had been my late husband's best friend, his partner in more ways than one, and in the years since Thomas's death he had become my closest ally. "Maggie," Marcus said, his eyes scanning my face and then looking past me into the house, "point me in the right direction." I stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The team moved with practiced efficiency, spreading through the room, their presence transforming the atmosphere entirely. Patricia rose from her chair, sputtering protests. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge into our home with me." Marcus pulled out his badge, the federal shield catching the light. "Special Agent Marcus Reynolds, FBI. And yes, ma'am, we absolutely can." The color drained from Patricia's face. Edward, who had been so casual about his son's violence moments ago, suddenly looked very alert and very worried. Daniel's expression shifted from anger to confusion to the first glimmers of fear. They had no idea who they were messing with, but they were about to learn. "You see," I said, moving to stand beside Marcus, "my late husband Thomas wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a federal prosecutor, one of the most respected in this state. And when he died, I didn't just grieve. I finished my law degree, the one I had put on hold to raise our daughter. I passed the bar exam on my first try, and for the past 8 years, I've been working quietly, building cases, consulting with federal agencies, specializing in one particular area, domestic violence and financial crimes." I watched their faces as the reality began to sink in, and I felt no satisfaction, only a cold, focused determination. "I've been watching you, Daniel," I continued. "For months I've been documenting every bruise on my daughter's body, every excuse, every lie, every time she flinched when you moved too quickly. I've been building a case against you with meticulousness that comes from loving someone so much that you refuse to let their abuser destroy them." I turned to Patricia. "And you, Patricia, did you think I didn't notice the way you enabled your son, the way you actively encouraged his violence? In this state, that makes you an accessory. But that's not even the interesting part." Marcus stepped forward, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, we've been investigating your business practices for the past 2 years. Tax evasion, money laundering through your dealerships, fraudulent insurance claims. The list is extensive. We were about to move forward with charges when Maggie called me tonight." Edward's face had turned gray. "You have no proof of—" "We have mountains of proof," Marcus interrupted, "including testimony from your accountant, who decided cooperation was preferable to prison. Your entire financial empire is built on fraud, Mr. Thornton, and it's about to come crashing down." I looked at Daniel, who was now standing very still, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "As for you, Daniel, You have 3 assault charges from tonight alone. I witnessed them. I will testify to them. But those are just the beginning. I've also compiled evidence of ongoing domestic abuse, intimidation, and psychological torture. Claire's medical records document injuries consistent with repeated physical assault. Her therapist, who she's been seeing without your knowledge, has detailed notes about your behavior. Claire was staring at me with wide eyes, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief, of hope dawning after months of darkness. But here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and clear. Right now, agents are upstairs collecting Emma and her belongings. Claire and Emma are leaving with me tonight, and they will never, ever be alone with you again. You will not contact them. You will not approach them. You will not so much as breathe in their direction. You can't, Daniel started, but Marcus cut him off. She can, and she has. There's already a restraining order in place, signed by a judge an hour ago. If you violate it, you will be arrested immediately. As for your parents, I continued, turning back to Patricia and Edward, you have 48 hours to get your affairs in order before federal charges are filed. I suggest you use that time wisely. Hire good lawyers. You're going to need them. Patricia had sunk back into her chair, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Edward was staring at the documents Marcus had spread on the table, his hands trembling slightly. Daniel looked like a man watching his entire world collapse, which was exactly what was happening. You might be wondering why I waited so long, I said, speaking now directly to Claire, my voice gentler. Why I didn't act the first time I suspected something was wrong. The truth is, I needed to be absolutely certain. I needed evidence that would hold up in court, that would protect you not just now, but forever. I needed to build a case so strong that there would be no possibility of you ever being forced back into this situation. Claire stood and walked toward me on shaking legs. When she reached me, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder with the kind of deep, wrenching cries that come from releasing months of pent-up fear and pain. I'm so sorry, Mom. She wept. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't. You have nothing to apologize for, I said fiercely, holding her tight. Nothing, do you hear me? This was not your fault. None of it was ever your fault. Behind us, agents were taking photographs of the scene, documenting everything. One of them appeared from upstairs carrying Emma, who was confused but unharmed, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. The agent handed her to Claire, and my daughter held her daughter close, both of them crying now. Marcus approached me quietly. The rest of the team is at their house, collecting Claire's belongings and documenting everything. We'll have her completely moved out by morning. Thank you, I said simply. Those 2 words carried the weight of years of friendship, of trust, of knowing that some people will stand with you when the world feels like it's falling apart. Thomas would be proud of you, Marcus said softly, of both of you. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. We left that house together. Claire, Emma, and I, escorted by federal agents, leaving behind 3 people whose lives had just been irrevocably changed by their own choices. As we walked out into the cool autumn night, I felt Claire's hand slip into mine, just like when she was a little girl, and we would walk home together after long days. Where are we going? She asked quietly. Home. I replied, we're going home. The weeks that followed were not easy. Healing never is. Claire moved into my house with Emma, and we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding what Daniel and his family had systematically destroyed. Some days were better than others. Some days Claire would wake up smiling, ready to embrace her newfound freedom. Other days she would barely leave her room, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of what she had endured. I learned patience in new ways during those weeks. I learned that healing is not linear, that trauma doesn't simply disappear because you're finally safe. I learned to recognize the triggers, sudden loud noises that made Claire flinch, masculine voices raised in anger on television that made her leave the room, Emma's innocent questions about Daddy that brought tears to Claire's eyes. But I also watched my daughter slowly, gradually, courageously piece herself back together. She continued therapy, this time with a specialist in trauma recovery. She joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, where she found strength in the stories of other women who had walked similar paths. And most importantly, she began to remember who she was before Daniel, before the abuse, before she had learned to make herself small and quiet and apologetic. One evening, about a month after that terrible dinner, we were sitting together in my living room. Emma was asleep upstairs, and Claire and I were drinking tea, wrapped in comfortable silence. She looked different now. The shadows under her eyes were fading, and there was color in her cheeks again. But more than the physical changes, there was something else, a light returning to her eyes, a strength re-emerging that I had feared was lost forever. "Mom," she said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I need to tell you something." I set down my tea and gave her my full attention. "I need to thank you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for what you did that night, but for everything. For not giving up on me when I had given up on myself, for seeing what I couldn't see, for being strong enough to do what I wasn't ready to do." "Claire, no, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I was so ashamed, Mom, so deeply, horribly ashamed. I kept thinking, how did I let this happen? How did I become one of those women? I thought I was smart, strong, independent. I thought I would never tolerate abuse. And then, somehow, I was living in it, drowning in it. And I didn't even know how to ask for help." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she wasn't crying with despair. She was crying with relief, with release. "I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad," she went on, "that other women had it worse, that I was overreacting, being too sensitive. Daniel was so good at making me doubt my own reality, and his mother. God, his mother made me feel like I deserved it, like I was the problem, like if I could just be a better wife, he wouldn't have to discipline me." The word discipline, spoken in Patricia's approving tone, still made my blood boil, but I stayed quiet, letting Claire speak. "That night at dinner when he hit me, some part of me wasn't even surprised. It had been building to that point for months. But then I saw your face, Mom. I saw the way you looked at him. And I suddenly saw the situation through your eyes. I saw how wrong it all was. And when you made that phone call, when you stood up and took control, I felt hope for the first time in so long." She reached across and took my hand. "You saved my life, Mom, literally saved my life, and more than that, you showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about never being vulnerable or never needing help. It's about knowing when to fight and having the courage to do it, even when you're terrified." I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, feeling her heartbeat against mine. "You are so much stronger than you know," I whispered. The fact that you survived what you survived, that you protected Emma, that you're here now, fighting to heal, that takes incredible strength. I didn't save you, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just provided the tools. We stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, bound by love and survival, by all the complicated, beautiful, painful things that tie families together. The legal proceedings moved forward with the efficiency that comes from overwhelming evidence. Daniel was charged with multiple counts of domestic assault and was facing a minimum of 3 years in prison. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but the prosecution, led by my colleagues and former students, was relentless. Claire's testimony was powerful and detailed, and the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. The moment the verdict was read, Claire broke down, sobbing not with sadness but with profound relief. She squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, and I felt her whole body release tension she had been carrying for years. Patricia and Edward's situation was, if possible, even more dramatic. The federal investigation uncovered decades of financial crimes, including tax evasion that totaled in the millions of dollars. Their carefully constructed empire of respectability crumbled in the face of irrefutable evidence. Edward was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Patricia received 10 years for her role in the schemes and for being an accessory to Daniel's abuse. I felt no pleasure in their downfall, no satisfaction in their punishment. I had never wanted revenge. I had only wanted my daughter to be safe and for justice to be served. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't a grim sense of completion watching them face the consequences of their choices. Through it all, Claire continued to heal. She returned to teaching, throwing herself into her work with renewed passion. Her students noticed the change in her, the way she seemed more present, more engaged. Several of them even wrote her letters, thanking her for being a positive influence in their lives, never knowing how much those words meant to her. Emma, resilient in the way that children can be, adjusted to the new normal with remarkable grace. She asked about her father sometimes, and Claire answered honestly but gently, never bad-mouthing Daniel but making it clear that he had made choices that hurt people, and now he had to face the consequences. We made sure Emma continued with a child therapist who specialized in helping children process family trauma. 6 months after that night, Claire started dating again, not seriously, just coffee here and there with a colleague from school. I watched her navigate these new relationships with a wisdom born from pain, setting boundaries firmly, refusing to accept anything less than respect and kindness. The first time she told me about going on a date, her eyes were bright with nervous excitement, but also something else, confidence. She knew what she would and wouldn't tolerate. She knew her own worth. A year after that terrible dinner, Claire made an unexpected decision. She wanted to speak publicly about her experience. She was invited to address a conference on domestic violence awareness, and she asked me to be there with her. I sat in the audience as my daughter walked onto that stage, poised and beautiful, and began to tell her story. She spoke about the warning signs she had missed, the gradual erosion of her self-worth, the isolation, the fear. She spoke about the shame that kept her silent and the courage it took to accept help. And she spoke about the importance of believing survivors, of creating systems that protect victims, of holding abusers accountable. I was one of the lucky ones. Claire said, her voice clear and strong. I had a mother who refused to look away, who had the resources and knowledge to help me. But there are countless women who don't have that. Women who are trapped by poverty, by immigration status, by lack of support systems, women who believe they have nowhere to go and no one who will believe them. She looked directly at me then, and I felt tears streaming down my face. If you take nothing else from my story, Claire continued, take this. If you know someone who might be suffering from abuse, don't wait for them to ask for help. Don't assume they can leave whenever they want. Offer support without judgment. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong. And most importantly, let them know they are not alone. The audience rose in a standing ovation. But more than the applause, I noticed the women coming up to Claire afterward, women with tears in their eyes, women who whispered their own stories, women who thanked her for her bravery. In that moment, I realized that something beautiful had emerged from something terrible. Claire had transformed her pain into purpose, her trauma into testimony. That evening, back at my house, the three of us sat together in the living room, 3 generations of women, each carrying our own scars, each finding our own strength. Emma was drawing pictures, her tongue poking out in concentration. Claire was reviewing the notes from her speech, making adjustments for the next event she had been invited to. And I was simply watching them, my heart full of a complicated mixture of sorrow for what we had lost and gratitude for what we had found. Grammy, Emma said suddenly, looking up from her drawing, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you and Mommy. You're already strong, sweetheart, I said, pulling her onto my lap. You're braver than you know. Will you teach me how to be brave? She asked, her small face serious. I glanced at Claire, who was watching us with soft eyes. Being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. I told Emma, it means you do the right thing even when you are afraid. It means you stand up for yourself and for the people you love. It means you never let anyone make you feel small or worthless. And it means you ask for help when you need it, Claire added. Because real strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to reach out, when to trust other people to support you. Emma nodded solemnly, as if we had just shared with her the secrets of the universe. In a way, I suppose we had. 2 years after that fateful night, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. It was from Patricia, written from the federal prison where she was serving her sentence. For a long moment I stared at the envelope, debating whether to open it or simply throw it away. Claire, who was visiting that afternoon, noticed my hesitation. "Is that from her?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Do you want me to be here when you read it?" "Yes," I said. "I think I do." We sat down together, and I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter was handwritten, the script shaky, so different from the precise, controlled woman I had known. I began to read aloud, "Dear Margaret, I don't expect you to read this letter, and I certainly don't expect forgiveness. But I've been working with a therapist here, and she suggested I write you, not for my sake, but as part of my own process of acknowledging the harm I've caused. I was wrong, so profoundly, terribly wrong. I raised my son to believe that violence was an acceptable form of control. I witnessed him abuse your daughter, and I applauded it. I cannot adequately express how deeply I regret those actions, how much shame I carry. I've spent many hours in therapy trying to understand how I became the person I was. I realize now that I was raised in a household where women were subservient, where strength was confused with dominance, where love was twisted into control. I internalized those lessons so deeply that I never questioned them. I passed them on to Daniel, and in doing so, I helped create a monster. I know that understanding the source of my behavior doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses it. What I did was unforgivable, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I see clearly now what I couldn't see then, that you are an extraordinary woman, that Claire is an extraordinary woman, and that I wasted any opportunity I might have had to know them by choosing cruelty over compassion. I hope that Claire has found peace. I hope that Emma is thriving, and I hope that you can look at your life with pride, knowing that you saved them when I would have destroyed them. I will carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life. Patricia, the letter ended there. I read it twice, trying to process the words, trying to understand what I felt. Claire was crying softly beside me, her hand covering her mouth. "Do you think she means it?" Claire asked finally. "I think she does," I said slowly. "I think prison, losing everything, has forced her to confront who she was. But you know what? It doesn't matter if she means it or not. Her redemption, her growth, her regret. None of that is your responsibility. You don't owe her forgiveness. You don't owe her anything." Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know, but I think I'm glad she's growing, not for her sake, but because it means the cycle might actually be broken. Daniel will have to do his own work, make his own changes, but at least his mother won't be there reinforcing the poison anymore." We sat in silence for a while, the letter resting between us like a strange kind of offering. "Are you going to write back?" Claire asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. Part of me wanted to respond, to acknowledge Patricia's growth. But another part of me, the part that had held my daughter while she sobbed, that had watched her rebuild herself piece by painful piece, felt no obligation to offer comfort to the woman who had contributed to her destruction. "No," I said finally, "I don't think I will. She doesn't need my forgiveness to continue her own healing, and we don't need to offer it to continue ours." Claire leaned against my shoulder. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart, more than words can say. As I write this now, 5 years have passed since that terrible Tuesday evening. 5 years of healing, of growth, of learning what it means to not just survive, but to truly live. Claire is thriving. She was promoted to vice principal at her school, and she's writing a book about her experiences. Emma is a bright, confident 8-year old who takes karate classes and isn't afraid to speak her mind. Daniel completed his prison sentence and, last I heard, has moved to another state. I hope he's done the work to change. For his sake, for the sake of anyone he might interact with, I hope he's become a different person than the man who raised his hand against my daughter. People often ask me how I knew what to do that night, how I managed to stay calm and take action when everything was falling apart. The truth is, I wasn't calm. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was terrified and furious and heartbroken. But I had learned something through years of loss and struggle, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent and focused, to act with precision instead of reacting with emotion. That night, my silence became the loudest weapon I had. I didn't yell or cry or beg. I simply made a phone call and let the system I had helped build do its work. But the real hero of this story isn't me. It's Claire, who found the courage to survive, to heal, to speak out. It's every woman who has faced abuse and found the strength to leave, to ask for help, to refuse to accept violence as love. It's the counselors and lawyers and law enforcement officers who believe survivors and fight for justice. It's the friends and family members who pay attention, who offer support, who refuse to look away when something is wrong. If you're reading this and you see yourself in Claire's story, please know this: it is not your fault. You are not weak, you are not broken. You deserve safety, respect, and genuine love, and there are people who will help you. You just have to reach out. And if you're reading this and you see yourself in Daniel or Patricia, know that it's never too late to change, but change requires honest self-reflection, professional help, and a genuine commitment to becoming different. The damage you've caused is real, but you can choose to stop causing more. As for me, I've learned that being a mother never stops. The ways I protect my daughter have changed as she's grown from scraped knees and playground bullies to predatory spouses and systems of abuse. But the fierce love that drives that protection remains constant. It's a love that will burn down the world to keep her safe, that will stand between her and harm without hesitation, that will never, ever give up on her. Sometimes I think about that moment when I stood up from the dinner table and reached for my phone. I think about how different things could have been if I had stayed silent, if I had convinced myself it wasn't my place to interfere, if I had believed the lie that what happened between a husband and wife was no one else's business. But I didn't stay silent, and in that choice, in that single phone call, everything changed. The dining room in Patricia's house probably looks the same as it did that night: expensive furniture, crystal glasses, a chandelier that sparkles with false elegance. But the people who sat at that table have been forever altered. Some for the better, some for the worse, all carrying the consequences of choices made and words spoken and violence enacted. I carry it too, in my own way. I carry the image of my daughter on the floor, the sound of Patricia's applause, the cold calculation in Daniel's eyes. But I also carry the memory of Claire's face when she realized she was finally safe. I carry the feeling of Emma's small hand in mine. I carry the knowledge that when it mattered most, I chose to act instead of freeze, to fight instead of flee. This is not a story about revenge. It's not even really a story about justice, though justice was served. It's a story about the lengths a mother will go to protect her child, about the strength that emerges from love, about the power of refusing to accept the unacceptable. It's a story about silence, the silence I kept while building my case, the silence I maintained while gathering evidence, the silence that fell over that dining room when I stood and made my call. But it's also about finding your voice, about speaking truth even when it's terrifying, about refusing to let shame or fear keep you trapped. Tonight, as I sit in my living room with Claire and Emma, as we laugh together over board games and hot chocolate, I am grateful. Grateful for the resources I had, the knowledge I possessed, the people who stood with us, but mostly I'm grateful that we're here, together, safe, healing. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been setbacks and nightmares, panic attacks and moments of doubt. Recovery from trauma is not a straight line. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes feels impossible. But we keep moving forward one day at a time, choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over fear. And when Emma asks me, as she sometimes does, to tell her the story of the night everything changed, I tell her an age-appropriate version, one that emphasizes strength and courage and love. Importance of standing up against wrong. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her the full truth. I'll tell her about the sound of her father's hand meeting her mother's face, about her grandmother's terrible words, about the phone call that set everything in motion. But I'll also tell her about her mother's incredible bravery, about the community of people who rallied to support us, about the possibility of healing even from the deepest wounds. I'll tell her that she comes from a line of strong women, women who refuse to be broken, women who transform their pain into purpose. Because that's the thing about surviving something terrible, you get to choose what it means. You get to decide whether it defines you or refines you, whether it destroys you or transforms you. Claire chose transformation. I chose action, and Emma will grow up knowing that she has the power to choose as well. The world is still full of women suffering in silence, trapped in relationships that slowly kill their spirits. The statistics are staggering. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Behind every number is a human being, a daughter, a sister, a mother, someone beloved, someone deserving of so much more than they're receiving. I can't save them all, but I saved one. I saved my daughter, and in doing so, I saved my granddaughter from growing up thinking that violence is normal, that love means pain, that silence is the only option. That has to be enough. It has to be enough because it's everything. As I look at my family now, scarred but not broken, wounded but healing, I am reminded of something my late husband once told me. The measure of a person isn't whether they fall. We all fall. It's whether they get back up and what they do with the knowledge gained from falling. Claire fell, but she got back up. And what she's doing with that knowledge is extraordinary, teaching, speaking, helping other women find their way out of darkness. I like to think Thomas would be proud of us. I like to think he's somewhere, somehow, watching over his daughter and granddaughter, pleased to see them thriving despite everything. But whether he is or isn't, I know this. We're going to be okay. More than okay. We're going to be strong and whole and beautiful in all the ways that matter. We're going to laugh and love and live full, meaningful lives. We're going to show the world what resilience looks like, what healing looks like, what genuine strength looks like. And if someone else out there reading this story, seeing themselves in it, finds the courage to reach out for help, to believe that they deserve better, to take that first terrifying step toward freedom, then sharing our story will have been worth it, because that's what silence taught me, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is act decisively when words fail. But once the action is taken, once the danger has passed, then it's time to speak, to tell your story, to let your voice ring out so that others know they're not alone. So this is my voice, our voice, ringing out into the darkness. You are not alone. You are not weak. You deserve safety and respect and genuine love, and there is always, always a way forward. It starts with one phone call, one conversation, one decision to refuse to accept the unacceptable. It starts with silence breaking into sound. It starts with recognizing that the person you thought you were dealing with was actually someone far more dangerous or far more powerful than they ever imagined. They had no idea who they were messing with, but they do now.